So when I discovered cowboy poetry in 2015, a friend of mine told me about this little town near here named Piapot, Saskatchewan. Now, who knows about Piapot, Saskatchewan? Most of you do. I was counting on that tonight. And she told me something that I found really strange. She said, they used to have Piapot Pride Day. And I said, Pride? Like pride? And she said, oh, no, because they're proud of their town. So they had Piapot Pride Day. It was their rodeo, they had cotton candy, and the whole deal. And I had a little thing in my cowboy poet brain, and it said, wouldn't it be fun if small town pride like Piapot met pride, as in the new meaning, and it would be like two prides collide. So here's my poem called Piapot Pride Parade. Say that 10 times. Young John in Toronto promised his old Saskatchewan mom this summer for the family reunion he'd dutifully drive home. Online he searched for maps, restaurants, and where to stay when he spotted an ad for Piapot Pride conveniently on the way. To discover a pride event en route to his hometown was such a rare surprise, he told his homies to come on down for the chance to participate in a pride parade on the prairie. So they decided to go, John, his buddies Todd, Phil, and Barry. The morning dawned glorious, lawn chairs lined so neat, all along both sides of Piapot's wide main street. Mrs. Finch was perched in the shade of the hardware store. She had snacks and thermos of coffee as every year before. Sisters Ruth and Ruby, with hound dog Mildred by their side, decked out in their finest to celebrate Piapot's Day of Pride. Myrtle Schmidt had 3 tow-headed grandkids in tow. They could almost taste the candy and peanuts they throw. Hank Parker and Herb Wilkie sat with old Two-Finger Joe up front along the curb so that no one would know they raped the legs of the majorettes and beauty queens, later lying to each other about all the women's legs they'd seen. The United Church ladies sold donuts on the lawn, and chairs were lined up neatly for the members to sit on. Reverend Huff, Mayor Bell, and old Doc McGarry sat sipping tea laced with whiskey with other dignitaries. And across the street at the Church of the Presbyterians sat Maud Malone, the town's 44-year librarian, with some of the town ladies thought to be the haughtiest, looking down their noses as though you were the naughtiest. The air was thick with excitement as each anticipated the flowered floats and booming bands, all with breath bated. Some were there for the horses, and some the indigenous bands, their ancestor Chief Piapot, whose name is on this land. The music tinkled from down the street. The crowd fell to a hush. Stragglers scurried across the blocked-off street in a final rush. The town's red antique fire truck, as usual, led the way, its siren shrilly singing, "We're here for Piapot Pride Day." The Kinsman and the Rotary had won first and second place for the best floats of the day, so they got to set the pace. The bagpipe band from Humboldt, bedecked in kilts of tartan, was the first to strike musically. To some, their ears were smartin'. Past town politicians waved from back seats of vintage cars, and in ancient horse-drawn carts were veterans of old wars. The Shriners rode their mini cars, their fezzes perched on heads, and Boy Scouts pitched their tents on towed-by-truck flatbed. The crowd was animated as the parade snaked right down Main, when they were stunned into silence and had to look again, for right behind the float for the chamber of Maple Creek pranced 4 nearly naked men that might be thought as freaks. At first glance, John and Barry fit in like cowboys sporting chaps, but underneath, they wore no jeans, causing Mrs. Finch to gasp for breath as she choked on her cookie and spilled on her lap. Hot coffee from her thermos jumped up, her arms aflap. Ruth and Ruby, spinsters, had never seen a man's bare cheek. With 4 at eye level, they stared more than they peeked. Somehow, hound dog Mildred got loose and, being curious, planted her nose in Barry's crack, which initiated a circus. That cold, wet prod, to say the least, was a shock to Barry. He toppled over Todd, who crashed into Doc McGarry. The doc had a bit much to drink, not usually one to falter, but a black leather miniskirt, fishnet stockings, and pink halter were definitely his weakness. And then he exclaimed, "Oh, God," when he realized they were on not a woman, but on Todd. His blasphemous eruption garnered tisks and sideways glances from the preachers and the old maids who'd never had romances and who could never understand Doc's fetish revealed so bare. Hank and Herb and old Two-Finger Joe just sat there and stared at Todd as he hoisted himself back up on his stiletto heels, shook himself off, and rejoined the procession with zeal. For a while, they were silent from the shock. They were stung. Finally, Hank muttered, "Not my type, but since I was young, never have I ever seen a set of legs quite like that." He looked admiringly at Todd and gallantly tipped his hat. On both sides of the street, church ladies were a titter, for they were not accustomed to bare skin bejeweled with glitter. They blushed and looked away, but couldn't help but look back, sort of like a train wreck you might encounter along the track. Now, being safe had always been a top priority for Phil. He was tossing condoms to the crowd for those who will. Pick them up and use them, but nobody could predict what would actually happen when Myrtle's 3 grandkids, scrambling for candy, were disappointed, but very soon discovered in the packets those funny-shaped balloons. They blew them up and tied them up and played balloon volleyball, which caused old Maud Malone to fret, faint, and fall. Now, Phil was nothing but a gentleman and rushed to help Maud in his banana hammock, which showed off his tight bod. She saw him coming over as she lay there on the ground. Her instinct was to run, but it's as if she were bound. Couldn't take her eyes off that fine male specimen. She couldn't quite get over that he probably preferred men. Such a waste, she thought, as Phil reached down to help and respectfully inquire if perhaps she'd hurt herself. Soon all the kids along the route had figured out the fun of sword fighting with each other with condoms in the sun. And of course, all those prudish ladies were nothing but aghast as condoms floated through the air while pride boys sauntered past. Well, the mayhem soon was sorted out for folks back in their seats, enjoying the last entries, and when the parade was complete, they gathered down the hall at the Piapot Community Hall for a dance and potluck picnic where the whole town had a ball. A number of the old maids were suitably impressed with Phil's manners, and they decided of the 4 he was the best. They brought him plates of goodies and fawned all over him. How did he keep his physique? And my, what gorgeous skin. Todd also had his groupies, Joe and Hank and Herb, and Doc McGarry seemed to hang on Todd's every word. Ruth and Ruby hovered near the 2 cute young things in chaps, but kept Mildred on a leash to avoid more wet nose mishaps. With John and Barry, the ladies stood in line for a chance, because after all was said and done, those young men could dance. They spun those ladies round the floor until they fairly shrieked, and while they waited for their turns, they stole peeks at bare cheeks. The balloon games continued, but no one was concerned. As far as the townsfolk knew, the children never learned the true purpose of those balloons, all so strangely shaped. They all just had so much fun, and everything turned out great. And that's exactly how it happened in Piapot, 17th of June. Some townsfolk are convinced it had to be full moon when pride folk from Toronto met Western hospitality. A day in Piapot Pride Parade that will go down in history. But just to be on the safe side, to avoid more of the same, Town Council voted next meeting to change the day's name. Although the town pulled together and took it all in stride, that was the last year they referred to their day as Piapot Pride.